Hey friends, welcome back to this video tutorial on application development using AngularJS and REST API. In the last video, we have set up a Spring Boot project in which we have added a simple controller and we tried calling it from the browser and we got the output. So in this video, we'll talk about adding more methods in the controller, and basically we're going to authenticate user and register user in this video. So let's create a new controller. Before that, I'm going to create a Pojo class, and that will be my entity class. So let me just add the Pojos package, and into which I'm going to create a user class. And this I'm going to specify as @entity, because in JPA you need this annotation. @entity is going to automatically create a table for this, and I'll say now uh, private string email, private string password, private string name. I will add a city, I will add a date of birth, city, contact and date of birth. All right, and then I will add a default constructor. Okay, and I will add a parameterized constructor also, and we'll generate the get a set of methods. So I should select that get a set of options from here. Right, so now my entity class is there. I should annotate this email with @ID annotation, because this is my primary key, and I should also specify the column, because I need to mention the length as 100, because it cannot accept more than 100. Or if you don't specify column annotation, by default it's 255 characters, and MySQL is not going to support that much length for the primary key. So these are the basic annotations we need. So now I'll create a DAO layer, and for that here I'm going to introduce a JPA repository in which you do not need to actually write a lot of code. You're simply going to create the interface. So there I'll say spring.suleiman.videostreamingapp.daos, and I'm going to create an interface called as user DAO, and there I'm going to simply say @repository. So this again, this stereotype annotation is going to make a repository, and then here I'm going to say extends JPA repository is going to make all things easy for you. So JPA repository is for what? Which class I'm going to use is user, and what is the primary key? It's of type string. So you will see the advantage of this JPA repository. You do not need to write any other methods here. All the CRUD methods are already present in JPA repository, and Spring will take care of implementing all those methods for us. Like for finding an employee, finding a user, adding a user, deleting a user, all of that will be automatically implemented by JPA repository. So that's it. That's my DAO layer. And then I'm going to say a service layer will create. Again, I'm going to create an interface. I'm going to call it as a spring.suleiman.videostreamingapp.services is my package, and I'm going to say user service. And then I'm going to add those methods. So first of all, I'm going to have a method public user authenticate, right? And it'll accept a user object, and there is another method public void, or I'll say boolean register, and it accepts again a user object. So that's it. So these are the two methods that I'm going to put into the service interface, and then I'm going to say a class user service IMPL, that is implementation. I'm going to implement that interface called user service. All right, so that's it. And there I'm going to add a stereotype annotation again called as @service because it is my service. And because I want to call a DAO method from here, I will inject that user DAO object, correct? And I'll say @auto wired, so it will automatically inject that object for us in this class, and then we can call those methods from here. So now for authentication, I'm going to use a query by example option in which I'm going to create a user object, user temp is equal to new user, and then I'm going to say temp dot set username, sorry, set email, and user dot get email, and temp dot set password, user dot get password. So now that is the example object I'm creating, and then I want to search this object in the table. For that, I'm going to use that example and of type user. Example user is equal to example dot of is a method. Example dot of is a method, and there I'm going to specify that temp. So now I can get this example user, and then here I'm going to say DAO dot, sorry, so optional, because I'm going to find out one user, so I'll say user optional is equal to DAO dot find one, and there is that option, there is a parameter which accepts an example, and here I'm going to pass that example user. So what it's going to do is it is going to find out the details. So by default it's going to write a query like this. So select star from user where you, so internet will be like this. So you where you dot email is equal to whatever email you are passing, and you dot password is equal to whatever password you are passing. So internally that query will be executed. And then I'm going to say if optional is present. So optional is a object which is introduced in Java 8. Optional dot is present. If it is present, then I'm going to return that data which is present in optional. So return optional dot get is a method. Otherwise, I'm going to return null. All right. And then similar way, I'm going to say DAO dot save, and I'm going to pass that user object. So as of now, I'm not doing any checking whether that user object exists or not, all of that. So by default, I'm going to return true. So that code can be written here, whether that email already exists or not, that you can check, and then you can actually see if the user is present, don't add it. If the user is not present, then add it. Okay, so now my DAO layer is ready, my service layer is ready. Now let us go ahead and create a controller. So now for example, I'm going to add a new control here. I'm now going to call it as a user controller. There you go. And I'm going to again say at the rest controller. And because I want to call the service methods, I will say user service, and then I'm going to say at the rate auto wired. And this is because we have already written at the rate auto, sorry, at the rate service on top of that service object. It is able to inject that object into it. And then I'm going to create two handler mapping methods. The return type is going to be a response entity of, here I'm going to say question mark, anything I can return now. So M1, and it's going to accept the user object. And this user object will be a request body. So here I'll say request body, all right, and user. And then by default, I'm going to return. So this will be a authentication method. So by default, I'm going to return new response entity of type string. And here I'm going to say authentication failed. Authentication failed. Invalid username and password. Invalid credentials. And I'm also going to specify the status as 200 because it has executed successfully. Okay. Yeah. So that I'm going to return. So this should be at the rate request body. All right, yeah. And then I'm going to say, let's call that method. So user temp is equal to service dot authenticate. Then I'm going to pass that user object which we have got from the client, and we'll check if temp is not equal to null. Then I'm going to return the response entity, which is going to have that user object itself. So here I'm going to change it to user, and here I'm going to pass that user object. So I'm returning that user object only back to the client if the authentication is successful. And another method I'm going to create. So, but before that, let us just put this at the rate request mapping annotation on top of this class in order to make sure that we are going to get the authenticate comma, so will be a value is equal to, and comma method is equal to request method dot post, because I want to call this method using mapping dot post. So now similar way I'm now going to create a public response entity of type question mark again and m2, and there again I'm going to say request object, sorry, at the rate request map at the rate request body, and then I'm going to say user, and then here I will say service dot add user, sorry, register user, and I'm going to pass that user object to it, and by default I'm going to return a string because I'm not checking whether the user exists or not. Here I will say user created successfully. All right. Now again the here I'm going to say at the rate request mapping register. So authenticate and register are my two APIs, and one is going to authenticate the user and second is going to actually check whether that data is here or not. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it. I'm going to check whether I'm getting the correct result or not. So let's just check it now. While it runs, let me also add so the table is going to get created. So just a minute. So the tables are created. Here is the user table, and here I'm going to add an email a@b.com, city is Pune, let's say, contact is something, date of birth is 2019-09, 09, name is Sachin, password is 1234. Apply and save. So I have added a data into it, and for testing I'll go ahead and here I'm going to check now. So authenticate, but here I need to pass the data in the post method. So I would go and use a postman app. I will use a postman app for testing purpose. So this postman is for checking whether the API is correct or not. So here I'm going to add new one, and the method will be post. Here I'll say http ://localhost :8080/ authenticate, and as of now there is no data, so you will see that required request body is missing. So here I'll go to the parameters, and I'm going to go to body, and I'm going to select a raw type is of type JSON, and there I'll go, I will add an object. So email is :a@b.com, and password is :12345. So let me just run it now, and there you will see the result. There is the data. Okay, so right now it is null. In the next video we'll talk about how to get the exact details from it. So I'll see you in the next video.